Hey everyone, and welcome back to Legend Makers. It's the show, part of the Legend Fiction show, where we chat with authors who have recently published books and who are part of the Legend Fiction community. We're joined today by Katherine Witzaney from Alberta, Canada. So we're about 2 hours, I don't know, it's different time zone. She is a legend in the Legend Fiction community, and she's recently published her first novel, is that right? Called Wingless.
Yes.
Can you hold it up so that we can see it? And welcome to the show. Look at that. As you can see, if you turn it sideways, look how thick that is. I mean, that's like a significant, how many, what's the word count? What's the page count?
It is really long for a middle grade. It's 66,000 words. Your average YA is like 70,000 to 100,000. So it doesn't seem long to people who are used to older fiction, but this is typically middle grade fiction is like 30,000 to 50,000 words long. My publisher was just nice.
So
they didn't mind.
Yeah, what's the age range when you say YA that's used to that length? What is the age range you're working? Is it 13 to 15?
So YA would be, it depends because this is lower YA and upper YA. That's basically 13 and up is what's YA. Middle grade fiction, which is what Wingless is technically, it's like 8 to 12. Mine is upper middle grade though. So I tend to describe it as 10 to 14 because it's got more substance to it than some of the early middle grade books do. So, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, go ahead and read the blurb. Tell us what the book is about.
Alrighty. So, in a world of flight, he was born wingless, but that is the least of his problems. Since being orphaned at a young age, wingless sprite Asher Songfeather has been sure of one thing: bat sprites aren't to be trusted. The fact that his own mother was one is something Asher does his best to forget. But when his adoptive sister Karenin falls deathly ill, he'll risk anything to save her, even if it means striking a bargain with a mysterious bat sprite newcomer. The deal sends Asher on a perilous quest into the heart of the bat colony itself, where nothing is as it first appears. Saving his sister will require more than just courage and wits. It will take trust, too. And Asher will have to rethink everything he knows about bat sprites, including himself.
Wow. So that sounds fun. And I love the fact that it sounds like a lot of challenging of preconceptions of your ideas about things. What's the overall feeling of the book? The feeling especially you want people to walk away with. What other books is it like? What are they called? Comp titles?
Comp titles are so hard for me with this because there's probably the closest I can come to comp titles would be, I don't know if you've heard of R.J. Anderson. She's an author who has written a couple of series all about, hers are specifically about fairies. Again, little people, right? And I mean, you could say that Wingless was loosely inspired by The Borrowers, but
I love The Borrowers.
yeah, I feel like it feels a little different than The Borrowers though, because The Borrowers were set in our world, and so their humans played a big role, and the contrast in sizes. Whereas Wingless it's set in an alternate fantasy world, and there are no humans around in this story. There are other humans in the world, but that doesn't come in at all. So it's very much just little people. I think the feel I wanted to give people was I wanted them to have the sense of wonder that they have, when you go into a really fun new fantasy world, but also to get people kind of thinking about maybe more difficult moral questions, but do it in a way that's not preachy. So, yeah.
I want to come back to that because that's kind of a big thing for us at Legend Fiction is fiction without being preachy, like actual fun, but faith inspired. And it sounds like you're also playing in the same sandbox. So what was the inspiration for the novel? How long have you been working on it? You had mentioned it had an earlier draft and now you started again or something.
So the story world, I started sort of brainstorming back in 2015. So I mean, it's been around for almost 10 years, I guess you could say. But I wrote an initial draft with completely different main character, different plot, different everything in that world. And I couldn't quite get it to work. I finished it, but it just, so then after a bit of a hiatus, I came back to this world.
Project. How much did you write? Because that's always amazing how people are I wrote this whole thing and it didn't work. And I started again, what, you did how much? What was that for you?
That first project, I actually wrote the first draft in 4 months, which was crazy because it was like 90,000 words. But I had spent probably a year or so brainstorming an outline-ish before that. And so I was really like, yeah, let's do this. So I wrote that in 2017, the spring of 2017. And then I went on to try to edit it for about a year into something better and couldn't. I think I rewrote the first half like 3 times, got stuck partway and stopped. And then I had some like health issues in 2018, which kind of put writing on hold. And I just stopped for a bit. And I stopped until about 2021 is when I started actually pursuing writing in a big way again. So, and that's when I outlined Wingless, which is, again, very different story, even though it's the same world. And yeah, I wound up writing that, and it is now. And originally it was written to be a YA. It wasn't, I didn't actually set out to write middle grade fiction at first, but when I got to the publishing part of it, it turned out that the story I'd written fits much better into a middle grade style story than, a teenage young adult style story. And so I switched tracks.
Okay. Let me ask about that. What is it that in working with your publisher helped you to decide this needs to be more this than that? What was it that convinced you?
So it was actually the process of querying and submissions. So I wrote Wingless in 2021, and then I dived into trying to get either an agent or a publisher in 2022. And I did a lot. I went hardcore. I sent out so many query letters and stuff. Oh my goodness. I got well over 100 rejections. And what a lot of the rejections were saying was...
Congratulations, I gotta say.
It was not fun. I tell everybody, I'm like, be prepared. If you want to go the traditional publishing route, just prepare yourself for a lot of no's. And they were often very nice no's. Like I had people telling me, well, this is well written. I like it, but it just doesn't fit my list. It's just not what we're looking for. And I think what most of the agents and editors were identifying was this story didn't fit well with the teenage audience. It's too hard to sell a story about a bunch of little tiny people to teenagers. It's just harder to make them take it seriously. Whereas in the middle grade realm, kids are much more open to that. You don't have to try and get them to take it seriously. They're already like, yeah, that's cool. I want to read about that. So I had an editor at a small publishing house get back to me and say, we don't publish middle grade fiction, but I think this would be a great middle grade story. And she gave me what's called an industry referral to another publisher, which is my publisher, Chicken Scratch Books, because they specialize in middle grade fiction. And so I submitted to them, and Kiri, who is the editor there that handles all of that, looked it over and was like, it needs a little bit of tweaking to fit middle grade, but if you're willing to make those changes, we're willing to take it on. So after a bit of humming and hawing and praying, I decided to go for it, and I'm really glad I did. But it did require a lot of killing of darlings with the changes I had to make.
So I'm curious, what was it that you said you had an earlier version of the story, and then I think you said 2021, you re-outlined it, created almost a whole new story. What happened there that prompted you to do something totally new and start again?
So I just knew that what I had before wasn't working. In the earlier version, there was a female main character who was also wingless. The main character of Wingless is wingless, not surprisingly. But I just couldn't seem to get her to work with me. I was having trouble connecting with her as a main character, and she was very passive. And then the plot that I had created it had too many holes. It was too hard it didn't feel realistic. It didn't hold together, basically, once I started really digging into it. And I got tired of it. It was like I had tried to rewrite it so many times. And then I found myself, the funny part is, the main character of Wingless is technically originally the villain of what that book was. Except that now he's 12, not 400. And so obviously some big changes have been made. He's no longer a villain. He's the main character, but he does have some things he needs to work through.
How did that happen? How did you take the antagonist and turn him into the hero? Like, was he always just the cooler, more interesting character?
I think because, initially in this old version, he was this 400-year-old cursed a person that had kind of gone slowly crazy over the years for various reasons. But because he was so old, I spent a lot of time trying to brainstorm his character and like what makes him tick and why is he doing what he's doing. And the process of that got me thinking about, well, it just made him more interesting, I guess you could say. He had a lot more depth. And then when I decided that I wanted to switch tangents, I decided, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll write a prequel. I'll write a prequel story. And then I was like, oh, well, what if the villain's childhood comes into play? And then it just changed and it sort of stopped being a prequel and he stopped being the villain and it just became about him. And then all of the ideas started flowing much better. So I was able to it's a very different story. It's completely different, but yeah.
Your point about your main character's passivity, how did you overcome that? And I assume you're happy with how the new character is, well, not passive and more motivated. What did you find worked for solving that problem with your writing?
So I think it's my personality. I am a conflict-averse person. So I actually struggle with this in all of my writing. I hate generating conflict and bad things happening to my characters. I like fixing problems for them. I don't like creating problems for them. But as an author, your job is to create problems for your characters. Otherwise, it's not interesting. So with Asher, who is the main character of Wingless, he's got a little bit more grit and willingness to be stubborn and maybe angry than my former main character did. Now, he isn't what you would describe as a volatile, angry character, but he's got more of a backbone, I think, and he's willing to, because he cares so deeply, he has a really strong motivation. He's willing to maybe go and do things that your average person wouldn't want to go do. So he's got that motivating him. And then I think just from the previous story to this story, recognizing I struggle with that and being like, okay, usually when I'm stuck, it's because I've solved a problem without creating another problem. And now whenever I get stuck, it's like, okay, the tension went out somewhere here. What did I do? What did I fix that I shouldn't have fixed? What can I unfix to fix that?
That's funny. What can I unfix? Oh, goodness. So, okay, what's your writing process like? Like, how often do you write? And you said you started again in 2021, and then you went the professional or the traditional publishing route. So what does your writing process look like to create a finished book?
So after many years of figuring it out, I do have a process nailed down now. It's not so much like I don't necessarily write every day. I write every day that I can. It depends on what my schedule permits. But I have an overall process where I take an idea, I have a brainstorming phase for usually anywhere from a year to multiple years. The idea is percolating, and I'm collecting, snippets of scenes and character ideas and themes and stuff. And I write it all down. And then once I have enough of those ideas, I transition into outlining. And this is usually the most challenging but fun / in-depth part of the process, because I will outline the entire story from start to finish using what I know of story structure. And then I can, because of story structure, I can take what I've got and fit it all in and then go, oh, there's these plot holes I need to fix, and try to fill holes. Once I have the outline finished, then I actually start drafting. And it doesn't usually take me super long to write a complete draft if I have a solid outline there. I will often have to tweak the outline a bit as I go, because as I write, I'll realize, oh, this doesn't work as well in practice as it did in my head. And then I stop and I tweak it, and then I keep going. But I have learned that if I don't completely finish my outline before I start writing, I will never finish the project. So it's really critical.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, there's a reason why outlines are needed, why they work. You had mentioned earlier that you had the characters struggling with, you said, some moral questions and so on. And so what's your take on writing, shall we say, faith-inspired fiction, which is, like we said, it's kind of a big deal for us in the legend fiction community. And to create a little bit of context, there are some communities out there where your fiction is not just faith-inspired, it's like faith-evident, it's like faith-expository, or it's very evangelistic. And not everybody wants that kind of fiction. And then to maybe swing the other way, you would have faithless fiction. It's like, it's just pure creativity. Faith doesn't matter. I just want to tell whatever I want, do whatever I want. And there are some people who like that. And In our case, we decided we love our faith, we're passionate about it, and we're also passionate about our fiction. And in terms of this thing that we're doing, the fiction comes first. If you're making a pot, it better be a good pot before it starts to have scenes of the Annunciation around the outside. Something's got to actually work like a pot. So in terms of being a good book, fiction is, well, how would you define the experience of fiction? And then what does faith-inspired fiction mean for you?
It's a good question. And there's so many different points of view on this. Valid ones, I would say. Yeah. A good, what is fiction? Well, fiction is a story. And as somebody who's studied a lot of story structure related things, stories tend to follow a particular path. They all follow the same arc, even though every story is different. So ideally, a story should have that structure to it. It's not just a series of events like narrated in a row. Like there's a purpose to it. It's an art form, and that lets you communicate more than just the basic plot details of the story. Like that's where things like theme come in and all of that. I don't, with my own stories, I don't set out to write a particular theme for a story. Usually it's after I write the story that the themes kind of start to emerge. Otherwise, I'd feel like I was preaching at people, if that makes sense. But there was a part 2 to your question here. Oh yeah, the faith element.
Yeah. Which you kind of started answering with the idea.
Kind of, yeah. I would say so. I like to hold up C.S. Lewis and Tolkien because they're like two of my big favorites, and they have different approaches to this. Tolkien hated allegory, so Lord of the Rings is an extremely Catholic, Christian work of fiction, but there's no elements of religion in it at least nothing overt. So he really allowed his faith to inform the story through the conflict of good versus evil and the choices that characters are making in the midst of that. Whereas with C.S. Lewis, for example, with Chronicles of Narnia, with his space trilogy, very overt Christian references there, intentionally so. And it works well because he's good at that style of writing. So I think both are good, but they're not going to appeal to the same audiences. And I really like the Tolkien approach for my own writing because I feel like with that approach, you can connect with anyone. It doesn't matter whether they're religious or not. It's the shared human experience. We all experience suffering. We experience trials. We know that hope is important and that despair can threaten and all of these things. And I think for myself, I get more out of stories that are like that cause you to think and cause you to be like, yeah, I resonate with this and give you hope, than I do necessarily with stories that are informing my intellect about like, oh, that's a really good point about Christianity, or things like that,
in like a fictive packaging or glitter or something. Yeah, to that point, I read a novel, gosh, this maybe was a year and a half ago now, I don't remember, but it was written by a Hindu author, and it was like a big fantasy story set in like a Hindu fantasy world, and the gods were real and stuff, and I was pulled in because it was so overtly religious in that way. But from the early chapters in the Kindle preview, it's like it didn't feel like I was going to get preached at. It felt like I was going to be engaged with, and in a sense, the characters were resisting the whole, I don't know, religious call throughout the whole thing. And so it's like, okay, I can get on board with this. It feels like it's going to be an actual story. And then I got to the end, and it actually was an epic story that was really, really good. One of the few that I really, really enjoyed. And by the end, I felt I've learned something about how they see the world that I'm really glad I now know. And I see Lewis kind of doing the same thing, pulls you into a journey, and at no point is he trying to convince you. He's trying to actually inspire you. I do think it's something you have to do very carefully because it has to be handled with a lot of freedom, a lot of maturity, and probably starting out, my recommendation would be don't do that, but try something that is trying to be more fun. Learn how to tell a fun story first. I think that's probably the most important thing to learn how to do. Speaking of which, and stories, what is your background? How did you get into writing Wingless?
How did I get into writing in general, or how did I get into writing?
What's your background story? Who is Katherine Witzaney?
Well, I grew up homeschooled here in Alberta, Canada, and I started writing when I was like 7. um, probably was inspired to start writing because I was obsessed with a particular series, Bruce Coville's The Unicorn Chronicles, and he had released books 1 and I think book 2 by the time I discovered him. And then book 3 took 2 years or more to come into existence.
The author for that one?
Bruce Coville. It's Coville. He has written a number of middle grade kind of books. I've only read his Unicorn Chronicles, and he's recently re-released them in actually a 7-book series because the way he wrote it, each book, the four books got more and more. He had to age them up with his audience because he took so long to write them. A little bit like Harry Potter. But in any case, I was so bored waiting that I started writing my own stories, heavily inspired by his stories, and kind of fell in love with that. Didn't really start to take writing seriously until my late teens, at which point I started feeling more of a call that, like, you know what, I feel like this is something I really want to do. I always wanted to be an author. When I was younger, I dreamed about publishing a book in my teens, kind of like Christopher Paolini. Didn't come to fruition, but that's good. I do not advocate for teenagers to publish books. I think teenagers should write and study the craft and strive, but I think it's better to wait till you're older before you start diving into the world of publishing. But that's a whole other kettle of fish. So yeah, I started studying craft. There was a particular curriculum that my mom found when I was in my early teens called the One-Year Adventure Novel, which is geared towards homeschoolers, and it kind of walks you through how to write your own novel over the course of a year. It teaches you about the different parts of structure, and there's an online community that's part of it where you can critique one another's stuff. And I didn't take it super seriously because I was so busy until years later. I actually, through writing fan fiction online, met a friend who I discovered had taken the same course. And she was like, they have these workshops down in the States that are amazing, week-long workshops. You need to come to one of them. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go down, I'm going to meet this friend and try out this week-long workshop. And I did this 2 years in a row, and it was a phenomenal experience. At the summer workshop, they actually bring in real agents and editors and other authors, and they give talks, and they really help form young writers and learning about, well, what is good storytelling, and what is our call as Christians, for example, writing stories. And it was really formative. I learned a lot about the whole publishing side of things through that, and it's got me really taking the writing craft seriously at that point. So,
wow, how fun! I've never heard of that.
It's fun. Have you heard of the Realm Makers crowd?
Part of their
Facebook
group.
Yes. So the forgetting his name now, the gentleman who created the One-Year Adventure Novel community is part of the Realm Makers group. And so you I wound up finding Realm Makers through this, and yeah, so it's all kind of connected.
Very fun. So you actually have a series, or not a series, a sequel that you're working on. When do you plan to share news about that one?
So right now it's in the midst of the first round of edits. Like, it is under contract now officially. And again, the goal is June 2025. Ideally, I would love to have the first round of edits finished at the end of this month. But it's always the first round that is the most labor intensive because it involves going in and, rewriting entire scenes and sometimes cutting out entire characters and making things work. So I am about halfway through that right now. I'm hoping I can get it done in the next week or two, and then there'll be a number of back and forths with the editor as I continue to make changes that she suggests. But yeah, and then hopefully there'll be a cover coming into appearance at some point this summer, and it'll hopefully get sent off for printing this winter. So yeah, there will be more details coming.
Excellent. Well, where can people go online to get a copy of the book and join your mailing list and get in touch with you and learn more about you?
So the best place would be my website, which is just katherinewitzaney.com. You'll get all the information about Wingless. You can sign up for my newsletter. Currently, Wingless is available for pre-order throughout March. It officially launches April 1st. And there will be an ebook, a paperback, and an audiobook narrated by me available at that point. So that is best place to go.
Excellent. Well, last couple of seconds here. If you had advice that you'd like to offer to other authors who are starting out, or maybe even to yourself, if you were to go back 5 years and drop a note on your own desk when you weren't looking, what would you want to say to yourself?
I guess the piece of advice I tend to give out the most, because all of my fellow aspiring writers that I know really struggle with this, is try to finish something. Try to finish something. Like, make yourself finish it, because that is, I feel like, one of the biggest blocks that new writers have. If they've never finished a book, it looms so large. You don't know how to finish it. You've never done it before. It's easy to start a book. It's so hard to get through the middle slump, and then even harder to tie it all up at the end. So if you can just don't try to make it perfect, just do a bad job, that's fine, but get it done, because then mentally you're like, I finished it. And now you can start trying to edit it, or you can start writing something new. But because you've at least finished something, you know you can finish something again in the future. And don't just re-edit the first 5 chapters over and over again into perfection before you've finished it, because you'll probably throw out the first 5 chapters and have to completely rewrite them after you finish it. So just get it finished would be my advice.